I think the challenge seems to be for the rest of the world is how do you continue to placate Mr. Trump. American presidency, the most powerful office in the world today, is left to validate itself.
Moving on to India-China, what is the progress really? How do you see this?
On China's part, that is relatively unclear, because we also saw during Pahalgam how China and Pakistan worked closely together.
It's a very critical moment in this group's evolution too, and especially after Donald Trump's coming back to power.
India certainly will have to put out an agenda which is actionable in the short term, but it also provides enough legs to this platform to sustain itself over the long term.
Two very important countries, India and China, unless they are in a good working relationship, what does BRICS really achieve? Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory. Yet again, the world witnessed a little more of Trump's transactional diplomacy and felt the Trump effect from EU to India all the way to Thailand and Cambodia. He once again boasts of using trade to settle wars. Yet again, he brought up the India-Pakistan ceasefire, this time speaking about the situation between Thailand and Cambodia, and mentioned how he used trade to settle the conflict between India and Pakistan and will do so in Thailand and Cambodia. On the other side of the globe, after high-stake negotiations with EU President, US and EU have reached a deal just days before the deadline. And Donald Trump declared that this was a very big deal, biggest of all. So let's look at the Trump effect across the world. Also on the other side, other than that, on the Ideas Factory, PM Modi's recent visits, much talked about politically for the cost to the exchequer, but what were India's gains? Finance Minister has signaled a potential thaw in India-China business relations, and China claims that a breakthrough has been achieved in the border areas. Dispute between India and China, though continue on many fronts, it is China, so cautious optimism prevails. Will India-China relations normalize? So joining me to discuss these questions is Professor Pant on the Ideas Factory. Very warm welcome to you. And, this morning, since last night, we've been hearing of this high-stake negotiation in Scotland's Turnberry with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Trump. And the two leaders have revealed a new trade framework, which is aimed at averting a full-blown transatlantic trade war. So if the talks had collapsed, then Brussels was also ready with countermeasures. But right now, also, we are hearing conflicting views from EU and US. So where does this trade deal stand and how important it is right now for EU, US and the world?
I think as two of the major economic players in the world, Nagma, this is certainly a very important moment for both of them. And what we are now looking at is the Trump administration concluding a number of these agreements with a number of their partner countries, and we saw just in the last few weeks he has announced with Japan and then now with the EU as well. I think the challenge seems to be for the rest of the world is how do you continue to placate Mr. Trump, and how do you continue to assure a certain degree of predictability in a relationship and with an administration that is increasingly volatile and has made no bones about being volatile and using that unpredictability and volatility as a tool as a negotiating strategy. And I think it seems to be paying off for Mr. Trump, at least in the short term, because if you see the kind of agreements that he has signed, including with the EU, there are significant gains for the US. And I think though Brussels is also claiming that this is a win-win situation, it seems on the face of it certainly that Mr. Trump has had a better terms of trade on paper. But I think the issue for other countries when they are dealing with Mr. Trump is that trade becomes one aspect of a broader relationship. When you're looking at Japan or you're looking at EU, these are partner countries of the US who want a stable political and strategic relationship with the US. So certainly for them, trade is important.
Yes.
But it has to be part of a larger bouquet of issues. So when you hear, for example, European Union saying that, look, or Trump saying rather that they have agreed to buy energy, they have, they have agreed to open certain markets that were not open before. It is a signal that the America's partners are willing to go a certain distance to ensure that a certain degree of predictability comes in their engagement with the US. Otherwise, it's a very difficult environment for everyone. So I do think that on paper, as of now, Trump's strategy of using tariffs as a negotiating tool seems to be paying off, and therefore other countries are adjusting. And of course, we wait and watch for the India-US agreement.
Of course, and when we talk about these tariffs as a tool for negotiation, this transactional diplomacy that Trump has been boasting of, that he's doing that again with Thailand and Cambodia, and he's once again, in spite of India's rejections multiple times, said that he used this as a tool between the India-Pakistan conflict, and he's going to use this. Or this has probably worked in Thailand and Cambodia. So we see that happening there as well. And no wonder Mr. Trump is very encouraged by this.
Yes, we really don't know actually which negotiating tool he uses, because it's not evident that Thailand and Cambodia have such great stakes in the trading arrangement with the US.
With the US, of course.
So if a country like China or EU or in Japan, they talk about it, the reality is that these are big economies, major economies dealing with the US. But when you talk of Thailand and Cambodia, it's not clear whether trade is going to be an instrument that is going to change the nature of their political dynamic. But of course, if America is involved as an actor, then I think the two countries, Thailand and Cambodia, will have to listen. And I think that seems to be at work, rather than this larger generic argument of that I'm using trade and therefore settling some of these disputes. I think on the India-Pakistan issue, of course, we know that the narratives are completely different. We know that from New Delhi's perspective, a certain chain of events led to the ceasefire. And of course, it's from India's perspective, Operation Sindoor is an ongoing operation. It has not really ended. So, but there is, when you have someone like Mr. Trump, there is very little you can do about many of the things that he says or even he does. And you just have to, make your peace in some ways with him, because it may not necessarily reflect the ground reality. It may not necessarily reflect the way certain outcomes come about. But I think it reflects his own sense of importance. It reflects his own sense of what he brings to the table. And of course, the sense that he needs, and if you listen to him carefully, he uses this phrase very often, that I don't get enough credit, that I do so many things, that I've done this, I've done that, but no one gives me any credit. So I think at some point, he's also someone who is looking for certain validation. And that validation, he himself gives it to himself.
That's interesting. The US president looking for validation.
Validation, yes. I mean, it's very rare. And I think in some ways that's also the story of our times. That US is not really the preeminent power that it used to be. And therefore, American presidency, the most powerful office in the world today, is left to validate itself. That, look, I have done this, I have done that, and yet this angst that America doesn't get credit for many of the things that he does. So I do think that most of the countries, in fact, if you see, they are just making their peace with him and with the way he conducts diplomacy, and trying to contain the damage to the bilateral relationship and move on, because that's the best you can do under circumstances.
By letting him say what he says and not really counter it. So
not back and forth. I think
there is no point doing that. So you move ahead. Let Mr. Trump say and believe what he wants to, even though ground realities could be different. Now, moving on to India-China, there have been very positive signals that bilateral relations are showing improvement, though very cautious, because this is China. So you have to there is a cautious optimism. Also economic ties are going to normalize, political ties probably are going to normalize. What is the progress really? How do you see this?
I think the progress seems to have been significant, as if you look at what is publicly available, and I think the fact that we are now looking at multiple senior level engagements and probably Prime Minister Modi visiting for the SCO summit to China. I think the change in atmospherics is quite evident. The change is also evident in terms of the what is happening at the people-to-people level. We have seen visas issue being sorted. We have seen Kailash Mansarovar Yatra issue, being now back in the fray. We are looking at, in some ways, the two countries. Again, I think there is a link here with Mr. Trump, that in the day and age of Mr. Trump, most countries are recalibrating their ties with other nations, and it's pretty evident that India and China, with two of the major global economies, will have to recalibrate, will have to reassess. But I would point out that the process started, if you recall, last October when we had the border agreement. And I think India's point throughout since 2020, if you go back to 2020 Galwan crisis, it was always that China unilaterally altered the status quo along the border. So it is China's responsibility to ensure that we move away from the brink. And once, I think last year, when China did decide to move away from, to take back its positions, we could move on, I think, with a wider set of relationship. And I think that was always what India had maintained, that we will move ahead with other aspects only when the border issue is back to status quo ante situation. And I think once that happened, you have seen movement in India's position on economic matters and others. And I think at a time when global economy is not doing very well, two major economic powers have to recalibrate in some ways. And if you recall, I think just recently, Indian Finance Minister said that we are moving forward with China. Of course, we have to be cautious in how we deal with China, because the past experience has not been very good.
Yes, and China has also claimed progress as far as border disputes are concerned.
Border is concerned. There has certainly been a move back from the brink on the border. Whether this leads to a broader reassessment on China's part, that is relatively unclear, because we also saw during Pahalgam how China and Pakistan worked closely together. Since then, we have seen how platforms like SCO, for example, have been instrumentalized by China. So therefore, when SCO defense ministers meet happened, we did not sign the joint statement. So there is clearly a tension in the relationship. Politically, economically, diplomatically, we are moving forward. But I think the strategic framework of the relationship is still in a limbo. And I think that's where the challenges will continue, because that strategic framework, from India's point of view, it's very clear. But from China's point of view, it's
also, when
not
you see the two hostile neighbors, Bangladesh and Pakistan, and the triangle that's formed there with China's assistance, and like you mentioned, that India and China need to recalibrate their equations and economic relations, looking at the current scenario, but the American factor comes into play. And when we talk of SCO, the Prime Minister will probably go there. The foreign ministers' meet was attended by our foreign minister. But, India is also compelled to abide by certain US diktats. And also, US is positioned here of curtailing China and its economic growth. So how does India, the challenge to balance that, the relation between US and China, you see that even during the upcoming SCO, that would be a concern that India will have to balance Quad and SCO?
I think it would be, and I think in some ways India will have to start thinking more strategically about these platforms, because if you as I was mentioning, if you look at China's approach to these platforms, Chinese are not woolly-eyed about any of these platforms. They use them for their strategic agenda, right? That's why you see coordination with Pakistan at the SCO. So I think to what extent India, for example, would engage with Quad or would engage with BRICS or would engage with SCO in framing a larger strategic response to China, that's an essential question for India going forward. I think the US issue becomes slightly less complicated at this point because President Trump himself is making an outreach to China. So there is apparently there are talks of his possible visit to China. So therefore, we may see a China-US reset in the coming months, and that would in some ways put India. I think there will be lesser pressure on India to frame its response to China. So I do think that that wider Indo-Pacific issues, wider strategic issues, the issues of, as you mentioned, China's role in South Asia and Indian Ocean region will continue to complicate the relationship, because it is, in a sense, a relationship where competition is inherent. We cannot do away with that. But the question is whether we are building enough deterrence in our relationship so that we can use a deterrence framework to build the economic ties, so that we are preventing China from using military as an instrumentality vis-a-vis India, vis-a-vis us, and therefore create other avenues, other aspects of leverage. And I think that's essentially a question India will have to move forward, because India cannot afford to ignore the capacity problem which India faces vis-a-vis China. So as you build your national capacity here at home, you have to continue to engage with China to ensure that the negative externalities of this relationship do not impinge on this very important bilateral.
Of course, and when you talk of SCO and talk of Quad, we know that India is set to host the Quad Leaders Summit. It's a very critical moment in this group's evolution too, and especially after Donald Trump's coming back to power or re-election, because there's a renewed era of transactional diplomacy, and he doesn't seem to believe too much in multilateralism. So Quad's future, is in question because the entire emphasis is on national self-interest. And even the defense minister, although defense minister has reiterated during the Shangri-La dialogue how America is here to stay, and they have keen interest in the Indo-Pacific. But Marco Rubio did say earlier that it's all about US, like me first kind of an attitude. So looking at those statements and Mr. Trump himself, the Quad's future and evolution at this moment, also India hosting the Quad summit.
I think the long-term future of Quad or the regional configurations emerging in the Indo-Pacific, that's not in doubt. The challenge is, how do you navigate Mr. Trump and his eccentricities over the next 3 years? Because the strategic realities, the strategic competition between US and China, the strategic competition between India and China, the Indo-Pacific landscape, that is a given. I don't think, these are structural realities with us that will continue to be with us. But the question will be whether we can effectively navigate the next few years as we build long-term sustenance capability, as we build institutional architectures, as we build certain standards and norms to manage a very, very difficult strategic environment. And I think Quad might face some challenges because, as you mentioned, Mr. Trump and his team is not particularly interested in looking at grand multilateral outcomes. They are interested in bilateral outcomes. They are interested in certain very transactional outcomes for them and for their political base at home. How do we manage that? How do we manage that turbulence? Will in some ways dictate what happens to the Quad.
Yes.
But I think as the Quad, as the host of the Quad Leader Summit, India certainly will have to put out an agenda which is actionable in the short term, but which also provides enough legs to this platform to sustain itself over the long term. So I don't think long-term sustainability is in doubt. What is the challenge is what do you do in the short to medium term?
Of course, and another organization, when we talk about multilateral organizations, is BRICS, and Prime Minister Modi traveled to Brazil to attend the BRICS summit. BRICS has grown in its popularity. More countries are joining and showing interest in joining. But at this moment, again, what did India really gain? Because, a lot of questions about two very important countries, India and China, unless they are in a good working relationship, what does BRICS really achieve? So if we look back at what happened and what did India gain at the BRICS summit, what is your analysis on that?
I would say that BRICS certainly this time allowed India to, and this was around Mr. Modi's, visit to not only BRICS but then to Argentina as well.
Yes.
I think it allowed India to rethink its Latin American, South America engagement. And India-Brazil relationship, I think, also got a boost from this relationship. So again, I think, whereas as a platform, and this time, of course, both Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin were missing from the summit there in Brazil, but the reality of BRICS being as a platform that can amplify the voice of the global South, I think that is something that perhaps India gains by continuing to be a member of BRICS, and therefore, and that's also the reason why you are seeing such an interest in BRICS from a large part of the world, where lots of countries want to join BRICS. So as BRICS becomes BRICS plus plus, the challenge would be whether the original intent behind BRICS, which was to challenge the global economic order as it has existed since 1945, to give greater voice to emerging economies in global economic architecture. I think those questions remain very relevant.
Of course.
If India can use that platform towards that, and that would be, I think, great.
Like you correctly mentioned that Prime Minister Modi also traveled to Argentina and a couple of other countries, Trinidad, Tobago, and renewed kind of the relationship with the global South. But when we come back to BRICS and we look at how President Donald Trump threatened, again, sanctions, talking about the BRICS economy, the BRICS currency, in that case, that threat may be real, unreal. He always has a habit of using it as a negotiating tool, which is why the question of how relevant BRICS is as an emerging economic bloc with those threats of sanctions.
See, every member of the BRICS, if you look at it carefully, in especially the big countries, they are having a separate bilateral engagement with the US. You have China trying to negotiate a trade deal. You have Russia trying to placate Mr. Trump because they are looking at a security architecture in Europe blessed by the US to a certain extent in their favor, and so it's a very complicated environment for BRICS at this point. So as a cohesive unit, I don't think BRICS was ever a politically cohesive platform. What gave it resonance was this idea that here are these economies that are asking for greater representation for emerging economies in the global financial and economic architecture. I think as we move towards an expansion of BRICS, BRICS seems to be becoming a platform which can amplify the voice of the global South, rather than looking at BRICS as a platform which will ever be geopolitically cohesive, especially at this point in time when every country and we started with that if you look at major trade deals that America is now signing, and Mr. Trump is celebrating those trade deals every day. I think it is a reflection of the times that we live in, that countries are looking beyond these platforms to bilateral engagements with the US, and that's what in some ways gives US enough currency in global politics. It still retains its relevance as a central player. Whether or not it will going forward, whether or not it sustains itself, whether or not the present world order, as we know, it is evolving in a certain direction where other powers are rising, whether or not US can retain that centrality, that's the essential question I think everyone is asking beyond Trump. Trump, of course, has to be placated, but beyond Mr. Trump, what is the future of American power and purpose? I think on that question hangs a lot of the global order questions. Absolutely,
especially like you mentioned, these are the times we live in where there is a sharper emphasis on national self-interest and skepticism about those multilateral cooperations and organizations. So on that note, we will stop here on this episode. Thank you so much for joining us on the Ideas Factory.